Someone sent me Bitcoin. 4 days later, it still had not arrived. I had no transaction ID, no way to check where it was, no way to know if it was lost, stuck, or simply never sent. Just a wallet balance that had not changed, and a feeling I could not quite name. That feeling is not panic. Not quite. It is the specific anxiety of not knowing, of having no visibility into something that matters and no clear way to get it. If you have ever been in that situation, or if you are in it right now, this is what was actually happening. I'm Satz, and this is the thing most Bitcoin guides miss completely. Let me tell you what the experience of waiting without information actually feels like. Because I think it is important to name it before explaining it. You check your wallet. The balance has not changed. You check again 10 minutes later. Still nothing. You start to wonder whether the sender actually sent it. You do not want to ask them directly because it might seem like you do not trust them. You search online and find a mix of reassuring and alarming answers. Someone says Bitcoin transactions can never be lost. Someone else says low-fee transactions get dropped from the mempool. You do not know which applies to you because you do not have the transaction ID to check. The not knowing is worse than knowing it is delayed. A delay has an end, not knowing has no shape. Here is what was actually happening in my situation, and here is what is almost certainly happening in yours. The reason this creates so much anxiety is that you cannot see what the network is doing. But once you can see it, the situation almost always looks completely different from how it feels. When someone sends you Bitcoin, the transaction is broadcast to the Bitcoin network and enters something called the mempool. The mempool is a waiting room. Thousands of unconfirmed transactions sit there at any given time, waiting to be picked up by a miner and included in a block. Once included in a block and confirmed, the Bitcoin arrives in your wallet. The time it takes to get from the mempool into a confirmed block depends on the fee the sender attached to the transaction. Miners prioritize transactions with higher fees because that is how they earn revenue. During periods of high network activity, transactions with lower fees can wait for hours, sometimes days. During quieter periods, even low-fee transactions confirm quickly. If you have been waiting 4 days and nothing has arrived, the most likely explanation is not that the Bitcoin is lost. It is that the transaction was sent with a very low fee during a busy period, and it is sitting in the mempool waiting for network conditions to allow it through. Everything changes once you have the transaction ID. The transaction ID, sometimes called a TXID, is a unique identifier for every Bitcoin transaction. Looks like a long string of letters and numbers. Every transaction gets one the moment it is broadcast to the network. Ask the sender for it. They will find it in their wallet under the transaction history. It is always there, even for pending transactions. Once you have the transaction ID, go to mempool.space and paste it into the search bar. What you will see is the current status of the transaction. If it is still in the mempool, you will see it listed as unconfirmed with a fee rate and an estimated position in the queue. That is actually good news. It means the transaction exists, it was sent, and it is waiting. It has not been lost, it is not gone, it is queued. If the transaction appears on mempool.space, it will eventually confirm. Bitcoin transactions in the mempool do not disappear quietly. They either confirm or, in rare circumstances with very old, very low-fee transactions, they drop out of the mempool and the sender can resend with a higher fee. But that is uncommon, and it does not mean the Bitcoin is gone. The sender still has it in that case. If the transaction does not appear on mempool.space at all, the most likely explanation is that it was never broadcast to the network. In that case, contact the sender and ask them to check their wallet. The transaction may be showing as pending on their end without having been fully broadcast, or there may have been an error in the sending process they are not aware of. Here is the practical checklist for this situation. Step 1. Ask the sender for the transaction ID. Do not be embarrassed to ask. Every Bitcoin sender has this information available, and sharing it is completely normal. Step 2. Paste the transaction ID into mempool.space. This will tell you immediately whether the transaction exists on the network and what its current status is. Step 3. If it is in the mempool, wait. The network will process it when conditions allow. There is nothing you need to do and nothing you can do to speed it up from the receiving end. Step 4. If it is not on mempool.space, contact the sender and ask them to check whether the transaction was actually broadcast. They may need to resend. Step 5. If the sender says it was sent but the TXID is not appearing anywhere, ask them to contact their wallet provider or exchange support. There may be a sending issue on their end that requires their attention. The most important thing to understand about this situation is that the Bitcoin itself is not in danger. It is either sitting in the mempool waiting, still with the sender, or in the process of confirming. The network does not lose transactions. What feels like disappearance is almost always just waiting. I have had messages from people who have gone through this experience and described it as one of the most anxious moments they have had with Bitcoin, not because of the amount, because of the absence of visibility. Holding value in a system you cannot see into, waiting for a confirmation that does not come, is genuinely uncomfortable, even when nothing is actually wrong. Understanding what is actually happening and having the tools to check it is what converts that anxiety into patience. And patience is what this situation almost always requires. Here is the short version. Bitcoin not arriving does not mean it is lost. The most likely explanation is that it is sitting in the mempool waiting to be confirmed, usually because the fee was low during a busy network period. To find out what is actually happening, you need the transaction ID from the sender. Paste it into mempool.space. You will see immediately whether the transaction exists and where it is in the queue. If it is in the mempool, wait. If it is not on mempool.space, the transaction may not have been broadcast yet. Contact the sender. The network does not lose transactions. What feels like disappearance is almost always waiting. If you want to understand the full picture of what happens between hitting send and a transaction confirming, the video on what actually happens when you send Bitcoin covers the complete process. That is the context that makes this whole experience make sense. Watch that next. Stack smart, stay curious. See you in the next stack.